The notes that you're going to be hearing about now are on companions. They relate to how to grow more vegetables, chapter 6a and 7. That's what you'll be reading about in the textbook. And the information I'm going to share with you is related, though not necessarily perfectly aligned with exactly what's in the textbook. So first, let's just make sure we're clear what a companion is. And we've talked about this, but in short, and the most basic thing I can say about this whole entire presentation is that you should be clear that a companion is essentially a non-crop farm organism, okay? So this might be what we would call a weed. It's not necessarily a bad thing, but it's a plant, or an animal. And when I say animal, that might include fungi or bacteria, though those aren't truly animals. But basically, it's not a crop. And be aware, please, that these companions can be pests or beneficials. Now, when we discussed this a little bit before, many of you talked about how, oh, a companion is a plant that works with another plant. That's the case too. And that would be, a lot of times, that type of companion is a companion that is a crop. So that would be sort of a special situation. But generally, when we're talking about companions right now, I'm referring more to organisms that we didn't put there on purpose. All right. And the reason we talk about companions in general is sort of described in the upper right-hand corner there. And it refers to this idea that a companion is part of an ecosystem. And a farm is truly an ecosystem. And this is one of the most important lessons that I want you all to be aware of as we do sustainable agriculture, is that a farm is an ecosystem. And many of you talked about it really intelligently last week in our seminar. We're trying to mimic nature, and that's what it means to be an ecosystem. If we have a balanced, healthy, sustainable, regenerative ecosystem, we're likely not going to have the kinds of companions we don't want, and we're likely to encourage the kinds that we do want. And this is part of, in Grow Biointensive, what is called the whole system approach. We've learned about the 3 stool legs, of composting, deep soil preparation, and intensive plant spacing. Well, the whole system approach is another principle of Grow Biointensive, and that's essentially what we're talking about today. So the first thing that's important to do as we figure out what companions are and why we care about them is be able to identify them. And a big group of the companions they're weeds. Okay, so weeds are companions. And I bet you can't see all the words on your slide super well, but we're going to get more into this. One of the things that I'll be asking you to do is learn about and be able to identify more of these than you probably already are able to. So that's one important type of companions. These are often ones we want to get rid of. Here's another type of companion that we often want to get rid of, the pests. These would be animal pests. I have a few of them in color because they tend to show up on our farm or kind of be a big deal. One is a cucumber beetle. Looks like a ladybug, not a ladybug. It's green. If you see these, you do have permission to smush them. Snails and slugs, we usually will send maybe out into the field. But these are pests that eat our food instead of us eating it. Another one, which I, knock on wood, have never seen on our farm, but often organic farmers really are concerned about these, are symphilins. And this is this kind of millipede looking thing. They are essentially decomposers that also eat live plants. And they can be really difficult to get rid of because they tend to like the exact environment that organic farming promotes. So those are some pests, but they're also, when we talk about companions, lots of beneficials. And what do these guys do? Well, the beneficials do things like, as it says, they can indicate the health of a system. They predate, they eat pests. They pollinate to help our fruits grow. And they're also decomposers. So the companions are essential and they're really important. Just it's, the beneficials are the ones that I'm talking about here. Another group of beneficials, the one that I heard a lot of you talk about when we were discussing this in the chat earlier, is the companion plants. And so these will often be, this is sort of the exception to the general definition. These are plants that we will plant on purpose. For example, legumes, they're a great companion crop because they're nitrogen fixers, all right? We can consider companions to be plants that are planted temporally at the same time, or they can be over time, like in a crop rotation. That's a type of companion planting known as seasonal companions. All right, and what is beneficial about crops? Well, here's a really good list, and this slide is pretty important. And there's a long list here. Plants can attract they can just be beneficial because they're attracting beneficial insects. They can repel pests with bad smells and so forth. Lavender, rosemary, mint, some examples. They can be trap crops, basically providing food for pests, and those pests eat that plant. But if you don't want to eat that plant, then fine, no big deal. The pests eat that plant and your plant is available for you to eat. That's called a trap crop. Another type of companion, this is sort of a seasonal companion. If you have some open space in your bed and you're not doing a particular planting for another month, you might plant something really quickly there, like some radishes or some lettuce, and it can be a catch crop. It's basically catching that time in a really quick way, sort of a companion to your typical seasonal planting. Companion plants also promote growth. They partition resources, they provide nutrients. Okay, and I do want to point out that another key principle of grow biointensive, companion planting. All right, so in addition to the 3 stool eggs, there are 8 total, so there are 5 others, and I've mentioned 2 of those others today, the whole system approach and companion planting. So beneficials are important. Now, when we think about companions, one of the things that we're sort of reacting to as sustainable agriculturalists are some of the problems associated with addressing companions. And in particular, those are pesticides. All right. So I want to spend a little time talking about pesticides here, because part of the reason you are taking a course in sustainable agriculture is in response to some of the problems that pesticides have created in agricultural systems. Pesticide, the term pesticide means killing pests. All right, and it's a big term that includes herbicides, which are used to kill plants, weeds in particular. It includes insecticides, which are used to kill insects, and fungicides, which are used to kill fungi. All right, so pesticides is sort of the overarching term. It does not include fertilizers. Fertilizers are a different thing. Sometimes people get confused and they just kind of group them together because both pesticides and fertilizers are chemicals, but they are for 2 totally different things. Fertilizers are nutrients to help a plant grow. Pesticides are generally toxins or poisons to kill things that will then, in that way, help a plant grow because those things won't be around. And pesticides do kill bugs and stuff that might otherwise be on a plant, but they also create other problems. For one, since they are applied in sort of a uniform way, oftentimes they encourage a less diverse system because we want to be able to have all plants that are all going to respond in the same way, the same amount to the pesticide. So we spray all the same thing over all the same thing, and that encourages monoculture. These pesticides, as it notes there, are also poisons. They're expensive, okay, and they tend to go away from where they're expected to make an impact. So pesticides are intended to kill a bug, let's say. 98% of the pesticide that gets sprayed around doesn't kill the bug. It ends up somewhere else, creating problems in the environment, maybe killing other bugs, maybe killing beneficial bugs, maybe accumulating and hurting other organisms in the system. And that system is all interconnected. And when you hurt part of the system, you hurt the whole thing. I do also want to note that our application of pesticides since the 40s has increased over 30%. And in that same amount of time, we now lose almost twice as much crop to pests as we did before when we were applying much less pesticide. Okay, so a couple things about pesticides for you to be aware of. All right, now fortunately, there are lots of things that we can do. Like if you go to a farm that's being run in a sustainable way and you ask the farmer there, you say, hey, what are you using for pesticides? Oftentimes they'll say nothing because they don't need to. And on our farm, we don't really use anything either. What we do is we try to maintain a balanced system. Yeah, we have some pests, but they're kept in check by other parts of the system, maybe a pest predator, for example. Or we have so much diversity that that pest can't grow out of control. If we do need to address a problem, we can just smush the pest, or we can create physical traps, or there are organic pesticides that can be applied as well. I cannot think of a time I've ever done that the whole time the farm's been run, because it's not really necessary. An integrated pest management system, or IPM, is something that can be used. And basically it means being smart about pests. So for example, if you find a pest and you know that it molts, it loses its exoskeleton in the month of May, that would be a great time for you to apply maybe some sort of desiccation, some powder that dries out the insect, just in that month of, what month did I say? May? Just in May. And at that time, with its exoskeleton gone, it's very susceptible to this desiccant, and it is much more likely to die. You don't need to put this out all the time, as long as it's an organic thing as well. It doesn't matter as much, but the less of any sort of pesticide we can use, the better. Or if you know something about, maybe this insect lays its eggs only on a certain plant in the month of June. Let's just make sure that plant isn't around in the month of June. This is what integrated pest management is. It's essentially being smart about the pest in question. Okay, so these are some things we can do around pesticides. Herbicides are another pesticide that we might want to apply in some systems, but it is not necessary, again, if you have a balanced, healthy ecosystem. And the other thing you can do is just weed. Weeding is somewhat labor intensive, but it's very effective. Another thing you can do is plant your plants really close together so they create a living mulch, and it's much harder for weeds to grow up in that situation. So as my last slide today, I do want to emphasize that a ecosystem, mimicking nature, creating a farm that is a balanced system, is the best way to address problematic companions and encourage beneficials. And I've listed some of the things that were mentioned earlier in the slideshow here on this slide about how we can attract beneficials. A couple other things that I didn't mention previously are creating nesting sites for beneficials to attract certain birds or certain decomposing insects or predatory insects. But essentially, the biggest thing that I want to emphasize is that there are two principles of Grow Biointensive that focus on companions. One is the idea of companion planting in general. And the second, like I've mentioned a bunch of times already, is this idea of whole system farming. And we are going to delve deeper into whole system farming by learning about companions at a deeper level.